Welcome to Blind Spots, a podcast where we're helping you fill the gap between what you want to do with your money and what you actually do. We are professional investors, writers, and financial planners helping you navigate the complexities of finance to optimize what you can control and cut out the rest. Join your host, Nick Shermans and Aaron Varghese, as we discuss the questions and nuances surrounding everyday money management. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blind Spots. In today's episode, we are going to be talking all about the secrets of building wealth. It might not be as hard as what you might think. This is part one of a two-part series. So this episode is for those who are working, you want to retire at some point, maybe you feel behind and you just need some quick advice on how to reach that end goal. Part two will be the secret to keeping wealth. That will be for our retirees or those who are on the cusp of retirement and want to ensure that they have enough money to last their lifetime. So Nick is going to cover the investment side of this conversation. I will cover the planning side. And we're just going to give you some simple tips and tricks on how to build wealth from the investment side and, of course, from the planning side. So Nick, what are some big pitfalls that you see in those who are investing for retirement?
Well, let's talk about the playbook for building wealth first, and then we'll back into the pitfalls, because I think people need to understand what the foundational pieces are. And despite what you see on social media or you see on TV, the formula for building wealth is actually quite simple, and it's actually quite boring. And wealth is built slowly. Not some magical thing that happens. It's not this big transformation. I mean, it can be. You could build a company and sell it or win the lotto, but that's an outlier. Most times, someone's working, they're earning, they're making more, they're saving, they're consistent, they're disciplined, and they do that year in and year out over 30 or 40 years. You poke your head up, the eighth wonder of the world is compounding, and that's how wealth is built. So really the first thing, and none of this is earth-shattering, is saving. You can't control markets. You can't control the economy. You can control your savings rate. So in a previous podcast, we talked about the most flexible retirees are those that have various pots of money. And by pots of money, I mean a Roth, which comes out tax-free, a traditional IRA or 401k, which goes in, you get a tax break up front, comes out, you pay taxes. And then a magic account that's very flexible and dynamic is a taxable account, meaning money that you've been paid, already paid taxes on it, you're investing it, you can take it out penalty free, there's no restrictions. And often the tax rates for that money coming out, you can control, even pay no taxes. If you do pay taxes, it's at a lower rate. So we like to encourage people to build a diversified stream of money, tax-free, tax break today, comes out taxable, and then a more flexible after-tax account. So saving is the first thing. Aaron, anything to add to that?
I always say that having options puts you in a very empowering place, because when you don't have options, you're kind of backed into a corner, and what you've got is what you've got, and that's all you can do. So by having different accounts with different tax treatments, it gives you options so that when things change in your life, you can be nimble and kind of massage your taxes and not, again, just be backed into a corner.
Okay, points 2 and 3 I'm going to kind of combine because they're related. That's compounding and time. So compounding is as old as the sun. It means your money makes money. Interest earns interest, right? And over a period of 1 to 2 years, it's kind of hard to see compounding, even though it's there. So let's say I have $1 million and I get 10% on that. Well, that's $100,000 gain. Now I have 1.1 million. If I get another 8%, then that 100,000 that I earned the previous year makes 8% in addition to my million. So compounding is really a juggernaut. And that's where the magic happens, is when you really start to get into those meaningful, big, round numbers. You can make money in your sleep. And that's really the holy grail for a lot of people, to build wealth so they can experience their version of a successful retirement and do what they want to do, when they want to do it, with who they want to do it with. And the best part about compounding, or I should say the most important thing about compounding, is to never interrupt it, right? So for those people, and I'm kind of stealing my pitfalls thing here, but if you have a long run rate to invest and you don't need the money, it would be a cardinal sin to interrupt compounding by selling stocks or assets that are going up in value or producing income, to spend the money or to do something. And I know life happens. So like, I don't want to say that you should never sell your long-term investment portfolio to fund something today, because I know certain things happen. It could be a healthcare event. It could be some sort of emergency, but try your best not to interrupt compounding your money, making money, coupled that with saving, coupled with time. That's really the playbook for building wealth: time, compounding, and saving. It's not generating 40% returns every year. It's not swinging for home runs, taking a bunch of risk. It's generating reasonable returns that you can consistently earn over the longest period of time. That's really the recipe for building wealth.
So you talked about a long run rate, and not to interrupt that, what would you consider as a long run rate?
I feel like the long term is getting condensed with our ADHD and our short-term time horizons and instant gratification. So I'd say 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, the long term was 30 years. Now that's maybe 10 to 15 years.
And how does attempting not to interrupt long-term compounding go along with dying with zero, like we talked about in our last episode? How do you manage the two?
I think you need to understand where that arc is that I talked about last time, when money becomes less important and experiences and lifestyle and health and family and relationships and all those other things become more important.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Once you hit that peak wealth piece and those other things become more important, money becomes less important, that's when you could potentially start to interrupt the compounding side, because money's just a tool. Money's a tool that we use to stack up experiences that define the people that we are. So I don't want to lose sight of that. I'm not saying you should save and invest and never interrupt and die with a bunch of money when you're 80. I'm saying you should look inward and find that balance of when you know it's time to stop wealth building mode and to transition into experience, lifestyle, whatever that definition of success looks like to you. And that number is different for everybody.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. So what other pitfalls do you find with people who are investing to try and build wealth?
People that feel like they're behind, and that could be real or perceived, tend to look for external factors to bail them out. And I'll give you a few examples. I've heard people say, gosh, I need to get 15 to 20% a year or I'm not going to have enough to retire. It's like, well, as we've seen from the last couple of years, markets go up and they go down. Markets move in cycles. And if you're relying on the markets to bail you out, you probably should go back to the drawing board, look at your savings rate, look at your expenses. Trying to reach for return or reach for yield can get you going the opposite way, as we saw in 2020 and 2022. So don't look for external factors to bail you out. The other thing that I've seen, which is very troubling for people that are still in wealth building mode, working and earning money. I'm 41. I have a lot of my peers that are starting to make more money, start to think more serious about retiring. They're in a web of hot take investing where they're trying to avoid losses. They think the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and they're trying to market time. And they're keeping money that would be allocated to a long-term investment portfolio and keeping it on the sidelines, waiting for a better entry point. And I think that behavior becomes, it's not encouraged, but becomes much more rational when you're retired and you don't have a paycheck coming in. Like, that's your nest egg. You're done with wealth building and you need to protect it. Sure, there's other ways to do that. There's better ways to do that rather than the whims of emotion and the ebbs of short-term market swings. But for a young person to do that, a 20-something, a 30-something, a 40-something, that is destructive, and you're fighting hundreds of years of empirical evidence to the contrary. Markets tend to want to go up, and the longer your run rate, the more the opportunity that they're going to go up. I shared a chart in my last market commentary. Over any 15-year period over the last 100 years or something like that, the market's 100% positive, 100% of the time positive.
And that doesn't mean that it's up 20,
or even 10 or even 5%, but it's positive nonetheless.
Yeah. So that's like shunning, like if a casino opened and said, if you come in here and you stay for a certain amount of time, you're guaranteed to win money. Like why would you not do that? Like, it's like you're taking the right side of empirical evidence and history. And to think that you have some sort of insight or oracle or crystal ball that you can jump in and out, you're interrupting compounding. It's probably not going to end well. And as the stakes get higher, as you accumulate more and more money, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to make a catastrophic decision. And one more thing that I'll share. So I met with this young woman, and I think I mentioned this a while back, but she was a little younger than me. And she'd crushed it in her career. She was amassing chips, as I call it, in her bank account. She was stacking chips. And she had she had like 500K in her checking account, and it had been like that for 5+ years. And this was during a period where the market was mostly up. It had some scary times like COVID 2020. I think we spoke shortly after that. But I went back and did the math. She foregoed about 500,000 in potential gains by playing the market oracle. And that's not uncommon. It's becoming more and more common. And it really hurts my soul, because I know these people are doing the right thing. And oftentimes they're very smart, very capable, but they're operating outside of their sphere of influence. They don't have an information filter. They're talking to the wrong people. They're seeking out opinions that confirm their own biases. And it's just a recipe for disaster.
Well, and the funny thing about trying to time the markets is that people have been trying to do that for forever, since the beginning of time. And we've always said that no matter how smart you are, no matter how much you know, there's always someone out there that's smarter than you. And if there is anyone who has ever been able to look at a crystal ball and been able to predict what happens next, they'd be a billionaire, plus. Sure. And no one can do that. So to think that you out there, whoever you are playing God with the market, it's not reasonable to think that way.
Well, and it's really like it becomes all consuming, right? Think how much effort that takes to comb CNBC, which is like the worst source of news. And when the mainstream media is reporting it, like everybody knows about it. But there's just so many rabbit holes people fall down. And again, I talk about the amount of information coming at us is not normal. Humans aren't meant to digest the amount of information that's coming at us from our friends, social media, the internet, our phones. I mean, think back to the Little House on the Prairie days. Life was so much more simple. Like you only knew, like, your knowledge base stretched to what was around you, and that was your peers and your family. Like, you had to really try hard to seek out information and get information. And life was just much more simple. We had a lot fewer decision points. Now we have thousands of decision points and tidbits of information coming at us, and we can't even pay attention to all of it. Like, it's physically impossible to pay attention to everything, because if you do, you pay attention to nothing and you're probably paralyzed. And how many people do we talk to that just can't make a decision because they're overwhelmed by information?
Inundated with information. Yeah, that's so true. Because, I mean, on the investment side, we have discretion over most of our clients' assets. So we can show them a plan. If they agree, then we execute. On the planning side, to a certain degree, there are some that we can do on behalf of our clients, but by and large, it's for them to implement. And when you have a perfectly sound plan presented to you, and then you go home and you have the homework to go and do those things that have been recommended, but then you turn on the TV or you open your phone and there's 100 articles that are for and against what you've just been told, it puts you in this spot where you just can't make a decision.
So I've talked about the playbook for building wealth on the investment side: saving, compounding, time. There's one component missing that's more in your neighborhood in regards to planning. So what is that other component to building wealth?
There are a lot of directions that this can go, but in the simplest terms, you build wealth by living below your means, saving and investing throughout your lifetime, and it's bound to happen. You can't spend more than you make and expect to build wealth. The numbers just don't work that way. So in the simplest terms, that's how I would lay it out.
Well, and I think budgeting. So what we advocate for people is to create a budget, and I feel like budgeting has this negative cloud around it. Like it sounds like a negative word,
Yep.
but I almost view it as a game. It's like an opportunity. Everyone has a fixed set of resources. We all have limited resources. Someone might have more, someone might have less, but allocating resources is what people do. It's what we do in this business. It's what we do in Pure Portfolios. It's what you would do in your household budget. It's what the government does. It's what a corporation does. Loop in your spouse, make a game of it. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. It could be an opportunity to realize the things that you want to do later in life and die with zero.
The way that I position budgeting, because it absolutely has a negative connotation to it, is that rather than looking at a budget as being something that's restrictive, you are literally budgeting and allocating money for something that you want to do or for something that you would want to have happen. So you're kind of giving yourself permission to spend on the things that are important to you within the confines of your resources. And I had a conversation with clients the other day because we were kind of going back and forth on their expenses in the future. And they said, well, we want to spend $20,000 on travel, for example. What if we wanted instead to spend $20,000 on a new car every year? That's kind of an extreme example, but the whole conversation came down to, it doesn't matter what you spend that $20,000 on, as long as it's important to you and you're happy with what you've spent that money on, it's not going to make an impact on your plan. Now, if you say I'm going to spend $20,000 on travel and $20,000 on a car every year, that could be something that impacts your plan. So those numbers are, of course, going to be different for everyone, but spending consciously and spending on the things that make you happy is what's important at the end of the day. It's not what it's spent on.
Well, and this might sound stupid, but I feel like a lot of people just don't know what's going out the door. They just don't know what they're spending, which is a problem. And again, like, we're never going to tell people how to spend their money. It's their money. But I look at a budget as a framework for making decisions. And if you don't know your starting point or don't know what's going out the door, it's just really tough to make good money decisions.
Well, and you talked about the pitfall of, maximizing your savings rate or looking for other places to bail you out. But you can't maximize your savings rate if you don't know how much you can save. And when you're looking for other places to bail you out, if you're missing the small things, they often call them low-hanging fruit, like you've got, it could be anything, like a subscription that you didn't know you were being charged on your card each month, whatever. If you don't fix the small things, you can't make larger decisions that are impactful.
Yeah, and that's sound advice. And I have like my life, I don't sweat the small things. Like, if my wife wants to go on Amazon and push buttons and buy stuff, that's fine. If I want to get a latte in the morning, if I want to eat out at lunch, when I'm at work, that's fine. I really try to get the big things right and think about the big things and model the big things, because I feel like it's the big things that derail people, but they get distracted by the small things. Not every money decision is the most important thing, and you need to talk about it with your spouse. Play that card for the big things. Get all hands on deck for the big things. That's the way that I live my life.
Yeah, I think it depends where you're at in the wealth building stage and what your resources look like. I think that's great advice for a lot of people, but if you're at the very starting point, the small things do matter, and people underweight the small changes that they could make today and the impact that it makes in the future.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because the small things equal big things. And if you're trying to get someone conditioned to do the right thing, I think you have to start with the small things, right? Like, people don't like to feel these major transformations, and that's not how change happens anyway. It's stacking up small things day after day, week in and week out, which equal big things. So Aaron's right. Focus on the small things. My school of thoughts: don't beat myself up over the small things, get the big things right. I think you can kind of marry the two, but someone just getting started, for sure, focus on the small things because they add up.
Well, and I've always, I don't know if this was in Psychology of Money book that we read or not, but there's just this saying kind of that, like, if you can't manage $100, you can't manage $100,000. So I think when you're starting out, getting the small things right and building the right habits will get you to the point that the small stuff won't matter anymore because you've built in the habits that will get you where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in our next episode, we will be talking in part 2 of this in the secrets to keeping wealth. So if you've made it this far in the episode, you probably didn't hear anything groundbreaking or anything that you haven't heard before. But I think the secret really to building wealth is to simplify, don't overcomplicate any situation, and live below your means. Save and invest, and you will build wealth. The simple formula.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Blind Spots. We will see you in the next one.